It looks like selfishness. From the outside, from the position of someone who has been on the receiving end of it, the dismissive avoidant's consistent prioritization of their own comfort over the needs of the relationship looks indistinguishable from simple selfishness. The withdrawal when closeness is needed, the practical redirect when emotional presence is called for, the specific, reliable pattern of the relationship's needs being subordinated to the avoidant's comfort whenever the two come into conflict. And the frustration of it, the real, legitimate frustration of being with someone who consistently, without apparent struggle, chooses their own ease over your needs, deserves to be named honestly rather than immediately explained away. Because one of the risks of understanding the psychology too thoroughly is the conversion of legitimate grievance into perpetual compassion, into the position of always explaining the behaviour rather than ever allowing yourself to simply feel its impact. So let the impact be real first. Let the frustration be legitimate. Let the experience of being consistently deprioritised, however psychologically explicable, be acknowledged as genuinely costly before the explanation begins. It costs. It has cost you. That is true. Now the psychology, because the psychology is real too, and understanding it does not require excusing it. The dismissive avoidance prioritization of comfort is not, at its root, selfishness in the ordinary sense. Selfishness implies a conscious weighing of options, in which the self is consistently chosen. What the dismissive avoidant is doing is closer to the operation of a system that does not perform the weighing at all in certain domains. Where most people experience a genuine internal negotiation between their own comfort and another person's needs, a felt tension that requires resolution, a pull in two directions that must be consciously navigated. The dismissive avoidant, in the specific domain of emotional availability and relational discomfort, often does not experience this tension. Not because they do not care, because the architecture roots the response before the conscious weighing can occur. The discomfort arrives. The system that was built to manage discomfort activates. The management produces the comfort-seeking behaviour. And the other person's needs, which would need to interrupt this sequence in order to be weighed against it, do not interrupt it. They arrive too late in the process, after the routing has already occurred. This is important to understand precisely because it changes what the behaviour actually is. It is not a person consistently deciding their comfort matters more than your needs. It is a person whose system consistently acts before the decision point is reached, which matters. Not as an excuse, the impact is identical regardless of the mechanism, but as an accurate description of what is actually happening, and therefore what would actually need to change for the behaviour to change. The comfort the dismissive avoidant is choosing is not luxury comfort, not the ordinary human preference for ease over difficulty that everyone shares. Understanding what the comfort actually is requires going to the architecture again. The dismissive avoidant built their entire functional self around the reliability of their own interior resources. In an early environment where external comfort was unreliable, where reaching for support produced inconsistent or dismissive responses, the child learned to stop reaching outward and start building inward. Self-sufficiency not as a preference, but as the only reliable infrastructure available. The self-sufficiency became sophisticated, became competence, became independence, became the genuine ability to function without external support that the dismissive avoidant takes genuine pride in as an adult and that does have real value. What it also became was the primary source of felt safety, the internal state of not needing, of self-contained equilibrium, of emotional independence from outcomes in the relational world. This state is not simply comfortable, it is the state that means safe. The state the nervous system returns to as its baseline definition of okay. When the relationship requires something that disrupts that state, emotional presence, genuine vulnerability, the acknowledgement of need, the sustained engagement with another person's emotional experience that real intimacy demands, the system does not experience this as an invitation to growth. It experiences it as a threat to the only form of safety it has reliably known. Choosing their comfort is, in the nervous system's terms, choosing safety, every time. There is a particular way this plays out in conflict that is worth examining specifically. The dismissive avoidant in conflict does not experience the conflict the way their partner experiences it. For most people, relational conflict is uncomfortable but navigable, an unpleasant but ultimately manageable experience that, if handled with some skill, can produce understanding and resolution. The discomfort of conflict is experienced as temporary, as the price of getting to something better on the other side. For the dismissive avoidant, conflict, particularly emotional conflict, the kind that requires sustained engagement with another person's distress and the vulnerable acknowledgement of one's own contribution to it, activates the system's threat response in a way that maps much closer to genuine danger than to manageable discomfort. The urgency of exit from this state is not proportional, as it might appear from the outside, to the stakes of the conflict. It is proportional to the nervous system's historical encoding of emotional intensity as something requiring immediate management. The partner who is expressing hurt and needing acknowledgement is not, to a rational assessment, a threat. To the dismissive avoidance nervous system, the combination of emotional intensity, relational demand, and the requirement to be present in one's own vulnerability while simultaneously managing another's distress is activating at a level that produces the same priority response as actual danger, which is remove the activation, restore equilibrium, return to the safe state. The partner's needs become, in this state, secondary not because they were consciously evaluated and found less important, because the system is in a state that does not have room for the evaluation. The threat is the primary content. Everything else waits. The choosing of comfort also has a specific relationship with the dismissive avoidance self-concept that is worth understanding. The self-sufficiency that was built in response to early relational unreliability became, over time, not just a coping strategy, but an identity. Who the dismissive avoidant understands themselves to be is deeply connected to the not needing, to the competence, to the independence that does not require management by others and does not require managing others' emotional states in return. The relational demands of genuine intimacy threaten this identity directly. Not the relationship itself. The dismissive avoidant is often willing to be in relationships, values aspects of them, finds meaning in connection, at the level the connection does not require too much. It is the specific demands of real, mutual emotional presence that threaten the identity. Because real, mutual emotional presence requires the acknowledgement of need, their own and yours, that the constructed identity of self-sufficiency was specifically built to prevent. When the relationship asks for genuine emotional presence, it is asking, from the dismissive avoidance interior perspective, for a partial dissolution of the self that was painstakingly constructed to survive the original relational environment. Even if the current environment is genuinely safe, even if the person making the request is genuinely trustworthy, the identity feels threatened by the request, regardless of the requester's actual character. Choosing comfort is therefore also, at this level, choosing the self. The specific constructed self that is the only self the dismissive avoidant has reliably inhabited. That choice will override most other considerations until and unless the constructed self is examined, the construction understood, and the possibility of a different, less defended self-concept developed through the kind of work that this examination requires. What does this mean practically for the person in relationship with a dismissive avoidant? It means that appealing to the relationship's needs, however clearly, however fairly, however patiently, will consistently run up against this architecture if the architecture is unexamined. Not because the dismissive avoidant does not hear or does not care, because the hearing arrives after the rooting has already occurred, after the comfort-seeking behaviour has already been activated. When the explicit articulation of the partner's needs reaches the conscious mind, the system has already begun moving in the direction of reduced activation. The partner who keeps explaining, who believes that sufficient clarity or sufficient patience will eventually produce the understanding that produces the change, is running a strategy against a mechanism that does not primarily respond to understanding. Understanding does not change nervous system rooting. It can be the beginning of the work that eventually changes the rooting. It is not the change itself. What does the rooting? Slowly, with sustained effort, usually with professional support, always requiring the dismissive avoidant's own genuine motivation for change. is the accumulated experience of the feared outcome not occurring, of being emotionally present in a relationship and the self not dissolving, of tolerating another person's needs without the sky falling, of discovering that the safety of the constructed, self-sufficient identity is not actually threatened by the genuine vulnerability that intimacy requires. This discovery cannot be produced by the partner's behavior. It can only be produced by the dismissive avoidant's own sustained, deliberate engagement with their own interior, their own choice to examine the construction and build something more flexible in its place. The honest, final word on this. The dismissive avoidant's prioritization of their own comfort is psychologically explicable. The architecture that produces it is real. The early experiences that built the architecture were real. The genuine threat the nervous system reads in emotional demand is, from inside that system's experience, real. None of that makes it acceptable as a permanent feature of an intimate relationship. None of that makes your needs less legitimate. None of that obligates you to indefinitely extend understanding in the direction of someone whose comfort seeking consistently costs you the reciprocity you deserve. Understanding the mechanism is useful for one purpose: accurate assessment, for the clear-eyed evaluation of what you are actually dealing with, what would actually need to change for the relationship to meet your genuine needs, and whether the conditions for that change are present. The conditions are the dismissive avoidant's own recognition of the pattern as a pattern rather than as simply who they are, their genuine motivation to address it rather than simply manage its relational consequences, and their willingness to do the actual work that the addressing requires. Not manage you better, not deploy more sophisticated versions of the same comfort seeking. Actually examine the architecture and begin, however slowly, the process of building something with more room in it. If those conditions are present, the psychology is the context for a real conversation about real change. If they are not present, the psychology is simply the explanation for why you have been consistently deprioritized. Explanations are not solutions, and you deserve a solution.